"You've gone too far, Isabella," Julian's voice thundered, his eyes blazing as he burst into the dimly lit linen closet upstairs. Moments before, Isabella, her face a mask of cold fury, had struck Maya, hissing, "You think you belong here, gutter snipe?" The New Orleans mansion's suffocating silence was shattered. Maya's cheek stung, a fiery handprint on her olive skin, but her eyes flashed with unyielding defiance despite the searing pain. This electrifying clash unveils one of the most gripping tales of prejudice, exposing the heart of class warfare. What secret fueled Isabella's vicious contempt? How will Maya, haunted by a tragic past, find the strength to triumph? And what shocking act will Julian unleash to shatter the foundations of their world? Dive into this tale of justice and redemption. Subscribe to our channel for the latest stories of overcoming prejudice and share in the comments where you're watching from. Stay for the twist that will leave you stunned. Every second reveals a secret you won't believe. The New Orleans mansion loomed like a monument to old money, its polished cypress floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers that cast cold, fragmented light across the cypress-paneled walls. Each step Maya took echoed faintly, a whisper of her place in this opulent prison. At 20, her deep olive skin glowed softly in the dim glow, but her eyes, wide, weary, and older than her years, betrayed a life already heavy with scars. She moved with the grace of someone who had learned to be invisible, her hands swift as they polished a silver sugar bowl worth more than her monthly wage. The bowl trembled slightly in her grip, not from clumsiness, but from the weight of the oppressive humidity that hung over the house like a storm waiting to break. Maya was no stranger to oppressive silences. She had grown up in its embrace, first in the smoldering ruins of a tenement fire that stole her family at 5, then in the sterile corridors of a Catholic orphanage where dreams were as scarce as compassion. Her father, a respected Italian-American baker known for his unyielding integrity, was presumed dead in that blaze, and Maya, lost in the chaos, was declared missing, a ghost in the city's records. Now, in the employ of Julian Thorne, a 29-year-old shipping magnate whose name graced the society pages, she lived as a shadow among shadows, her existence defined by the whims of his wife, Isabella Devereaux. Isabella was a vision of porcelain perfection, honey-blonde hair coiffed in elegant waves, blue eyes sharp as ice picks, and a smile that never reached her soul. The daughter of Marcus Devereaux, a Creole tycoon whose empire was built on ruthless ambition, she carried her father's disdain for those she deemed beneath her station. To Isabella, Maya was not a person, but a fixture, a thing to be ordered and dismissed. The marriage between Isabella and Julian was a transaction, a merger of power orchestrated by Marcus to bind the Thorne shipping fortune to the Devereaux legacy. Julian, with his sharp jawline and eyes like a stormy sea, was a silent partner in this arrangement, his presence in the mansion as fleeting as a specter. When he was home, he moved through the rooms like a man carrying an unseen weight, his words few, his gaze distant. Maya stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a copper pot, her reflection distorted in its surface. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, stealing your breath before you could claim it. She wore the gray housemaid's uniform Isabella demanded, starched, constricting, a collar that chafed her neck. Her hair, a cascade of dark waves, was bound tightly in a net, another rule to erase her individuality. At 20, she should have been pursuing dreams, perhaps opening her own bakery like her father, creating sweetness in the world. Instead, she was here, trapped in a cycle of servitude, her spirit tethered to the whims of a woman who saw her as less than human. Isabella's voice sliced through the silence like a shard of glass. "Maya, where are you, girl?" Maya flinched, the pot slipping from her hands into the soapy water. She dried her fingers on her apron, heart pounding, and hurried toward the morning room. Isabella sat at the small, lace-covered table, her silk dressing gown clinging to her frame, a half-eaten beignet on the plate before her. Her red lacquered nails tapped impatiently, each click a warning. "Yes, ma'am?" Maya's voice was soft, her eyes fixed on the floor. Isabella's lips curled into a sneer. "This beignet is an insult. Did you even attempt to follow the recipe? Or are you just incapable of simple tasks?" The words landed like a physical blow, laced with the contempt Isabella never bothered to conceal when Julian was absent. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze low. She had learned early that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll make another," Maya said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence," Isabella snapped, shoving the plate across the table. The beignet slid off, crumbling onto the pristine rug. "Clean it up, and you'll remake it properly this time, or you'll regret it." Maya knelt, gathering the powdered sugar and crumbs with trembling hands. Isabella's heels clicked closer, stopping inches from Maya's bowed head. "You're lucky I permit you to stay here," Isabella hissed. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The words burrowed into Maya, each one a needle threading pain through her soul. She wanted to scream, to rise and demand respect, but the weight of her reality pressed her down. She was alone, with no one to hear her cry. As Maya scrubbed the rug, the heavy front door opened. Julian's footsteps, measured and deliberate, announced his return. He appeared in the doorway, his crisp linen suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. Isabella's demeanor shifted instantly, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "Darling, you're home early." She glided toward him, but Julian's eyes flicked briefly to Maya, still on her knees, before settling on his wife. "The meeting ended sooner than expected," he said, his tone flat. He stepped past Isabella, heading for the stairs without another word. Maya felt his gaze linger for a moment, but it was gone before she could be sure. Isabella's smile faltered, then hardened as she turned back to Maya. "Get up and do your job," she spat. "And don't think you can slack off just because he's here." Maya rose, her knees aching, and returned to the kitchen. The beignet incident wasn't the worst she'd endured. Last week, Isabella had forced her to polish the entire silver service by hand because a single speck of tarnish had dared to appear on her favorite fork. The week before, she'd thrown a glass of iced tea at Maya for arranging the hydrangeas with the wrong shade of blue. Each act was a calculated cruelty, hidden from Julian's eyes, a performance of power Isabella relished. Alone in the kitchen, Maya leaned against the counter, closing her eyes. She pictured her father's face, his warm smile as he lifted her onto his shoulders during a Mardi Gras parade. "You're my brave girl, Maya," he'd said. "Never let anyone dim your light." But that light felt so far away now, buried beneath years of loss and humiliation. The fire that took her family had left a scar on her shoulder, a jagged reminder of all she'd lost. She traced it through her sleeve, grounding herself in the pain. Night fell, and Maya retreated to her small room off the linen closet, a space barely larger than a pantry. She sat on the narrow cot, pulling a faded photograph from beneath her pillow. Her father in his baker's whites, her 5-year-old self grinning beside him. "I'm trying, Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking. She didn't pray for escape. She prayed for strength, for one more day of endurance. The mansion slept, but its shadows never did. They clung to Maya, whispering of her insignificance, her isolation. Yet deep within her, a spark flickered, a stubborn, defiant ember that refused to die. She didn't know it yet, but that spark would soon ignite, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake the very walls of this cold, gilded cage. The night wrapped the New Orleans mansion in a heavy, suffocating cloak, its silence broken only by the faint hum of the icebox in the servants' quarters. Maya sat on her narrow cot, the springs creaking under her slight frame, her fingers tracing the edges of a worn photograph. The image was her anchor, her father, tall and proud in his baker's whites, his dark eyes crinkling with warmth as he held 5-year-old Maya's hand. Her tiny self beamed up at him, unaware that a fire would soon tear them apart. The photograph was all she had left of a life that once felt whole, a life before the orphanage, before the mansion, before Isabella's venomous tongue. She pressed it to her chest, whispering, "I'm still here, Papa," as if the words could bridge the chasm of 15 years. Maya's room was a cell of necessity, tucked beside the linen closet, its walls bare except for a single crack that spidered across the ceiling like a wound. The air smelled of lye soap and hot linen, a constant reminder of her role in this house. At 20, she should have been in a local college, perhaps studying business to one day open her own bakery, carrying forward her father's legacy of creating joy. Instead, she was a housemaid, her dreams smothered by the weight of survival. The fire that claimed her family had left more than memories. It had etched a jagged scar across her left shoulder, a physical echo of her loss. She touched it now, through the thin fabric of her nightgown, feeling the raised skin that marked her as a survivor, even if she didn't always feel like one. Isabella's cruelty was a daily ritual, performed with the precision of a predator. That morning, as Maya served coffee, Isabella had inspected the porcelain demitasse with a sneer. "This is filthy," she declared, though it gleamed. She'd tipped the scalding coffee onto Maya's apron, the heat seeping through to her skin. "Clean it properly next time, or you're out," Isabella had hissed, her blue eyes glinting with satisfaction. Maya had bitten her lip, swallowing the pain, her hand steady as she wiped the floor. Julian, seated at the table, hadn't looked up from his newspaper, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. She wondered if he noticed, if he cared, or if she was as invisible to him as Isabella intended. The memory stung, but Maya pushed it aside, focusing on the photograph. Her father had been a hero in their neighborhood, a baker who stood up for his fellow Italian immigrants. His name was whispered with respect in their community. She remembered his voice, deep and reassuring, telling her stories of resilience under the stars. "You're my light, Maya," he'd said. But that light had dimmed in the orphanage, where she learned to shrink, to speak only when spoken to. The fire had taken more than her family. It had stolen her voice, her future. Yet in moments like this, alone with her father's image, she felt a flicker of defiance, a stubborn refusal to let her spirit break. She rose, tucking the photograph under her pillow, and moved to the small, clouded mirror propped against the wall. Her reflection stared back, high cheekbones, full lips, eyes that held too much sorrow for her age. Her waves, freed from the net Isabella demanded, framed her face like a crown. She allowed herself a rare smile, remembering a secret she kept hidden, a tiny act of rebellion. In the kitchen, when the house slept, she would turn on the old radio, its static giving way to the soaring notes of a jazz trumpet that pulsed through her veins. She'd dance, her body swaying to the music, her bare feet whispering against the tiles. Those stolen moments were her defiance, her way of reclaiming a piece of herself that Isabella couldn't touch. Today had been different, though. Isabella's cruelty had escalated, as if sensing Maya's inner resistance. After the coffee incident, she'd summoned Maya to the grand salon, where a single cushion lay askew on the damask sofa. "This is unacceptable," Isabella had snapped, her voice a whip. "You'll polish every piece of silver in the dining room by hand tonight." The task was punishment, not necessity. Hundreds of forks, spoons, and knives, each gleaming already. Maya had worked until her fingers ached, the metallic tang clinging to her skin. Isabella had watched for a while, her lips curled in a mocking smile, before sweeping out to a charity ball, her hypocrisy as glaring as her diamond brooch. Maya's hands still throbbed as she sat back on the cot, but her mind drifted to a memory of her father teaching her to waltz. They'd twirled in their small apartment above the bakery, her giggles mingling with his laughter, the world soft and safe. She closed her eyes, letting the memory wrap around her like a blanket. She imagined dancing now, not in secret, but freely, her body moving without fear, her scar a badge of survival rather than shame. The dream felt so close, yet so impossibly far, trapped behind the walls of this mansion, and Isabella's relentless disdain. A sound jolted her from her reverie, the creak of the mansion's grand staircase. She froze, heart racing. It was past midnight, Julian was rarely home this late, and Isabella's events kept her out until dawn. She crept to the door, peering into the dark hallway. Nothing, just the house settling, or perhaps her own nerves. She exhaled, returning to her cot, but the unease lingered. Isabella's absence tomorrow for a 3-day trip to Atlanta promised a fleeting reprieve. Maya didn't dare hope for much, but the thought of 3 days without Isabella's voice, her cruelty, sparked a cautious warmth in her chest. She lay down, the photograph's edge pressing against her palm. Her father's words echoed, "Never let anyone dim your light." She wanted to believe them, to believe she could be more than a maid, more than a target for Isabella's hate. The scar on her shoulder itched, a reminder of the fire, of the girl who had survived. She whispered a prayer, not for escape, but for courage, for the strength to endure another day. The mansion's shadows pressed close, but within Maya, a spark glowed. A dream of justice, of freedom, of a life where she could dance in the light. It was faint, fragile, but it was hers, and she would guard it fiercely, no matter what tomorrow brought. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., its rhythm a quiet heartbeat in the dark. Maya closed her eyes, the photograph cradled against her heart. She didn't know that the spark within her was about to catch, that the silence she endured was the calm before a storm. For now, she slept, her dreams woven with music and memory, a testament to a spirit that refused to be extinguished. The New Orleans mansion exhaled as Isabella's limousine vanished down the oak-lined drive, its engine's hum fading into the morning humidity. For the first time in months, the air felt light, unburdened by the sharp edge of Isabella's voice. Maya stood in the grand foyer, her gray maid's uniform stiff against her skin, the feather duster in her hand a silent witness to her servitude. The silence was different today, not the oppressive hush that smothered her spirit, but a soft, inviting stillness, like a canvas waiting for color. Isabella's departure for a 3-day society event in Atlanta had left the mansion in Maya's care, a rare moment of freedom in a life bound by orders. At 20, Maya felt the stirrings of something dangerous: hope. She moved through her morning tasks with mechanical precision, dusting the crystal chandelier, polishing the mahogany banister, setting the dining table with silverware that gleamed like mirrors. But her mind wandered, replaying the secret dances she stole in the kitchen, the jazz rhythms that set her soul alight. Isabella's absence was a gift, a chance to breathe without fear of a sneer or a slap. Maya paused by the tall French doors, sunlight streaming through in golden ribbons, painting her olive skin with warmth. She closed her eyes, letting the light seep into her, a fleeting rebellion against the shadows that defined her days. In her small room beside the linen closet, hidden beneath a pile of neatly folded sheets, lay her treasure: a pale yellow dress, bought with months of saved wages. It was simple, with a flowing skirt and delicate cap sleeves, a whisper of who Maya might have been in another life. She retrieved it now, her fingers trembling with anticipation. Back in the kitchen, she turned on the old radio, its static crackling before giving way to a vibrant jazz tune, the kind her father used to hum. The rhythm pulsed through her, a call she couldn't resist. She slipped out of her uniform, the gray fabric pooling on the floor like shed armor, and stepped into the dress. It hugged her gently, the fabric cool against her scar-marked shoulder, a reminder of the fire that stole her past, but not her spirit. Maya unbound her dark waves, letting them cascade freely, a crown of defiance. She glanced at her reflection in a polished serving tray, barely recognizing the woman staring back, eyes bright, lips curved in a smile. "Just for today," she whispered. "I'm Maya. Not the maid, not Isabella's target, but Maya, the girl who once waltzed with her father under starry skies." She turned up the radio, the music flooding the kitchen, spilling into the cavernous halls of the mansion. Her bare feet found the rhythm, stepping lightly on the cool tiles, her hips swaying as the beat carried her away. She moved to the grand salon, the space with its damask sofas and towering bookshelves, a stage no one but her would ever see. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing her in a glow that felt like forgiveness. Maya spun, her dress flaring like a petal caught in the wind, her laughter mingling with the song's infectious melody. She sang along, her voice soft at first, then bolder, filling the emptiness with life. The scar on her shoulder, usually a source of shame, seemed to pulse with pride, a testament to her survival. For these stolen moments, she was free. Free from Isabella's cruelty, from the weight of her past, from the mansion's cold embrace. Maya twirled, her dark waves bouncing, her arms outstretched as if embracing the world. She leaped onto the plush Aubusson rug, her bare feet sinking into its softness, and danced with abandon, each step a declaration of existence. "I'm here," she murmured, the words lost in the music, but etched in her heart. She imagined her father watching, his warm smile urging her on, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. The mansion, once a prison, became her sanctuary, its walls echoing with the joy she'd buried deep. Unbeknownst to her, the front door opened silently. Julian Thorne, his business trip to Mobile canceled at the last minute, stepped into the foyer, his leather briefcase in hand. The magnate, usually a ghost in his own home, froze at the sound of music. Lively, unfamiliar, alive. His brow furrowed. Isabella was gone. The staff minimal. who dared disturb the mansion's sterile calm? He set his briefcase down, his polished shoes silent on the cypress floors, and followed the sound, drawn like a moth to a flame. Up the grand staircase he climbed, his movements cautious, almost reverent, as if intruding on a sacred ritual. The music grew louder, a vibrant pulse that seemed to breathe life into the lifeless house. He reached the salon, the door ajar, and peered through the gap. There she was, Maya, in a pale yellow dress that flowed like sunlight, her body swaying to the jazz rhythm, her face alight with a joy he'd never seen. Her dark waves framed her like a halo, her laughter a melody sweeter than the song itself. Julian's breath caught, his hand gripping the doorframe. He had seen her countless times, head bowed, eyes averted, a shadow in his wife's orbit. But this was no shadow. This was a woman, radiant, unbreakable, a force he couldn't look away from. Maya spun, oblivious to her audience, her dress catching the sunlight in a shimmer of yellow. She sang a line from the song, her voice rich and unpolished, and leaped again, landing with a grace that belied her hardships. Julian stood rooted, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The mansion, his empire of ships and commerce, felt suddenly small compared to her. He didn't know her, not really. But in this moment, he saw her, truly saw her, and something within him shifted. A crack in the ice he'd built around himself. The song neared its end, and Maya slowed, her chest heaving, her smile wide and unguarded. She pressed a hand to her heart, feeling its rapid beat, and laughed, a sound so pure it seemed to cleanse the air. Julian leaned against the wall, torn between stepping forward and retreating. He didn't want to break this moment, didn't want to see her shrink back into the maid's uniform, the subservient mask. For now, he watched, a silent witness to a dance that felt like a revolution. Maya swayed to the final notes, her eyes closing as she savored the freedom. The radio clicked off, leaving a hush that felt sacred. She stood still, bathed in sunlight, her scar hidden, but her spirit laid bare. She didn't know Julian was there, didn't know that her dance had ignited something in the man who had never truly seen her. The mansion held its breath, waiting for what came next. But for now, Maya was enough. Her joy, her defiance, her light, a beacon in the darkness she'd endured for so long. The morning sun filtered through the New Orleans mansion's tall French doors, casting pale shadows across the cypress floors. But the warmth of yesterday's dance had already begun to fade. Maya stood in the kitchen, her pale yellow dress folded away, replaced by the starched gray maid's uniform that clung to her like a chain. Her dark waves were bound tightly in a net, her shoulders hunched as she scrubbed the butcher block, erasing any trace of her fleeting rebellion. The jazz melody still echoed in her mind, a ghost of joy she clung to, but the mansion's silence had returned, heavy and unforgiving. At 20, Maya knew better than to hold on to hope too tightly. It slipped through her fingers like sand, leaving only the weight of her reality. She moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, dusting the salon's ornate cornices, polishing the silver tea service until it gleamed. Each motion was deliberate, a shield against the vulnerability she'd felt yesterday, dancing freely in the sunlight. Julian's presence lingered in her thoughts, though she couldn't place why. He'd been home since his unexpected return, working in his study, his footsteps a rare disruption in the mansion's stillness. This morning, as she'd served his coffee, he'd looked at her, not through her as usual, but at her, his stormy eyes holding a flicker of something she couldn't name. "Thank you, Maya," he'd said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. She'd nodded, heart racing, and fled to the kitchen, unsure what to make of it. The memory unsettled her. Julian was a cipher, a shipping magnate whose world of commerce and society balls was as distant from hers as the stars. He was Isabella's husband, bound to her by a marriage Maya knew was more contract than love. Yet his brief acknowledgement had stirred something in her, a dangerous spark of being seen. She pushed it down, focusing on the beeswax polish in her hands. Isabella's return loomed, a storm cloud on the horizon, and Maya couldn't afford to be caught dreaming. The front door slammed open, shattering the quiet. Isabella's voice cut through the air before her heels clicked on the cypress floor. "Maya, where are you?" Maya froze, the polishing rag slipping from her grip. Isabella wasn't due back until tomorrow. Her Atlanta trip was meant to last 3 days. Maya's pulse quickened as she hurried to the foyer, smoothing her apron, her face a mask of calm. Isabella stood there, resplendent in a Chanel suit, her blonde hair pinned in an elegant chignon, but her blue eyes blazed with fury. A leather train case lay abandoned by the door, its contents spilling onto the floor. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "You're back early." Isabella's lips twisted into a sneer. "Don't state the obvious, girl. The event was a disaster. Fools who can't organize a simple luncheon. Now where's my sherry? Or have you been lounging while I was away?" She strode into the salon, her heels stabbing the floor, and began inspecting every surface, her white-gloved fingers trailing over the furniture like a predator seeking prey. Maya followed, head bowed, bracing for the inevitable. Isabella paused by the mantelpiece, her gaze locking onto a single porcelain shepherdess, slightly askew. "This," she hissed, snatching it up, "is why I can't trust you. Can't you do anything right?" She flung the figurine at Maya, who caught it instinctively, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Maya murmured, the words automatic, a reflex honed by months of abuse. Isabella's eyes narrowed, sensing weakness, and she moved closer, her jasmine perfume sharp and cloying. "Sorry doesn't dust my house," Isabella snapped. "You've had 3 days to make this place perfect, and it's a mess. What were you doing? Playing dress-up like you own the place?" Her voice dripped with disdain, each word laced with the classism she wielded like a blade. Maya's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, her silence a shield against the storm. Isabella's inspection continued upstairs, Maya trailing behind, her heart pounding. In the linen closet, Isabella's gaze fell on the pale yellow dress, neatly folded on a shelf. Time slowed as Isabella's hands shot out, seizing the dress like evidence of a crime. "What is this?" she demanded, holding it up, her face contorting with rage. "You wore this in my house? You, a filthy charity case, prancing around like some wannabe debutante?" Her voice rose, echoing off the walls. Maya's mouth went dry, her scar itching under her uniform. "It was my day off, ma'am," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't touch anything." Isabella's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Your day off? You don't get to play dress-up in my home, you gutter snipe." She threw the dress at Maya's face, the fabric catching on her hairnet before falling to the floor. Maya stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides, fighting the urge to run. Isabella stepped closer, her hand rising, and before Maya could react, a stinging slap landed across her cheek. "Trash!" Isabella spat, the word a venomous echo of her hatred. The air crackled with the impact, Maya's head snapping to the side, her cheek burning. She staggered, catching herself against the wall, tears pricking her eyes but refusing to fall. Isabella raised her hand again, but a deafening crash stopped her. Julian stood in the doorway, his fist still on the wooden chest of drawers he'd slammed. Isabella's silver-backed brushes and perfume atomizers scattered in a glittering wreckage. "You've gone too far, Isabella," he roared, his voice a thunderclap that shook the room. His stormy eyes burned, not with the cold detachment Maya knew, but with a fury that seemed to ignite the air. Isabella froze, her hand hovering, her face paling. "Julian, what?" she stammered, her voice faltering under his glare. Maya clutched the wall, her breath shallow, her cheek throbbing. Julian stepped between them, his broad frame a shield, his presence filling the room. "I've seen how you treat her," he said, his voice low, lethal. "I've known for months, but this ends now." His words were a blade, cutting through Isabella's composure, leaving her exposed. Isabella's lips parted, a weak laugh escaping. "She's just a maid, Julian. Why do you care?" Her tone was dismissive, but her eyes darted nervously, betraying her unease. Julian's jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving her. "She's a person," he said, each syllable deliberate, "and you have no right to touch her, to speak to her like that. Not in my house." Maya's heart pounded, her mind reeling. Julian's defense was a lifeline, unexpected and disorienting. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her throat was tight, her body rooted to the spot. Isabella's face twisted, a mask of indignation. "You're overreacting," she said, tossing her hair. "She deserved it. Look at this rag she dared to wear." She kicked the yellow dress, her heel tearing the fabric. Maya flinched, a small gasp escaping her lips. Julian's eyes flicked to the dress, then to Maya, and for a moment she saw something in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps, of the woman who danced in that dress, radiant and free. "Get out of this room, Isabella," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "We'll talk later." Isabella hesitated, her lips trembling with rage, then stormed out, her heels echoing like gunfire. The door slammed, leaving a silence that buzzed with tension. Maya stood, her cheek still stinging, her hands shaking. Julian turned to her, his expression softening, but he didn't speak. She met his eyes, searching for words, but none came. I'm okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure it was true. He nodded, a muscle ticking in his jaw, and left without another word. Maya sank to her knees, gathering the torn dress, her fingers tracing the rip. The moment of freedom she'd stolen was shattered, but Julian's stand lingered, a crack in the mansion's cold facade, a spark in the darkness she'd thought unbreakable. The New Orleans mansion stood silent in the wake of Isabella's storm, its cypress-paneled halls echoing with the ghost of Julian's fury. Maya lingered in the linen closet, clutching the torn pale yellow dress, her cheek still throbbing from Isabella's slap. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the next blow. At 20, Maya had endured countless humiliations, but Julian's intervention, his fist shattering Isabella's gilded world, had cracked something open inside her. Fear mingled with a fragile hope, a sense that the balance of power in this cold, opulent prison might finally shift. Yet she knew Isabella would not let this stand. The Devereaux name was a fortress, and Isabella would summon its might to crush any threat to her dominion. Upstairs, Isabella's heels clicked furiously, her voice a sharp staccato as she spoke into her telephone. "Father, you need to come. Now." Julian's lost his mind over some housemaid. Maya, folding linens to steady her trembling hands, overheard the venom in Isabella's tone. Marcus Devereaux, the patriarch whose empire cast a long shadow over New Orleans, was not a man to be trifled with. His wealth and influence were matched only by his unapologetic disdain for those he deemed inferior, a trait Isabella had inherited with relish. Maya's scar itched, a reminder of her own fragility, but she straightened her spine. She would not cower. Not today. By mid-morning, the purr of a sleek black Cadillac announced Marcus's arrival. Maya watched from the kitchen window as he stepped out. A towering figure in a tailored seersucker suit, his silver hair gleaming like a crown. His face was a mask of controlled rage, his eyes cold and calculating. Julian met him at the door, his own expression unreadable. A stark contrast to the fire he'd unleashed hours before. Isabella trailed behind her father, her jacket draped over her shoulders, her lips curled in a smug anticipation of victory. Maya busied herself with scrubbing pots, her heart pounding, knowing this confrontation would decide her fate in this house. Marcus's voice boomed through the foyer, shaking the chandelier's crystals. "Julian, you dare humiliate my daughter over a servant? Have you forgotten who put you where you are?" He strode into the salon, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. Julian followed, his movements deliberate, his linen suit as sharp as his resolve. Maya, summoned by a curt gesture from Isabella, stood at the room's edge. Her hands clasped tightly, her maid's uniform a stark reminder of her place. Isabella's eyes flicked to her, gleaming with malice, as if savoring the moment of her impending destruction. Julian stood by the fireplace, his gaze steady. "I haven't forgotten anything, Marcus," he said, his voice low, cutting through the older man's bluster. "But your daughter crossed a line. She assaulted Maya, humiliated her, and I won't tolerate it." His words were a blade, precise and unyielding, and Maya's breath caught. No one had ever spoken her name with such weight, as if she mattered. Marcus laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Assault? She's a maid, Julian. A nobody. You're throwing away our alliance for this?" He gestured dismissively at Maya, his eyes raking over her with disgust. Isabella was disciplining and incompetent. "You should thank her for keeping your house in order." Isabella nodded, her smile venomous. But Julian's expression darkened, a storm brewing behind his sea-gray eyes. "Discipline?" Julian said, his voice rising. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small reel of film, its sleek surface glinting in the light. "Let's see what you call discipline." He crossed to the living room's mahogany console, which housed a small projector and screen. The room fell silent as grainy home movie footage flickered to life. Isabella's voice, sharp and cruel, hurling slurs at Maya, ordering her to kneel in the hot sun for hours, mocking her with vicious contempt. The footage shifted to yesterday's scene. Isabella slapping Maya, calling her trash. The pale yellow dress crumpled at her feet. Maya's throat tightened, her scar burning as she relived the shame. But she held her head high, refusing to look away. Marcus's face paled, his jaw tightening. But Isabella's laugh broke the silence, high and brittle. "That's nothing. She deserved it. She's lazy, insolent." Julian cut her off, his voice a whip. "Enough, Isabella. This isn't about discipline. It's about your cruelty, your prejudice. And I've had enough." He turned to Marcus, his gaze unrelenting. "This is the daughter you raised. And this," he gestured to the screen, now frozen on Isabella's sneering face, "is why our marriage is over." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You think you can walk away from us? I made you, Julian. This marriage secured your shipping empire. End it, and you'll lose everything. Isabella stepped forward, her voice shrill. He's bluffing, Father. He wouldn't dare. But Julian's calm was unshaken, a fortress against their threats. He produced a leather-bound folder from the console, tossing it onto the coffee table with a soft thud. Papers spilled out, letters, contracts, financial ledgers, each one a thread in the web of the Devereaux-Thorne alliance. This is your leverage, Julian said, his tone icy. Your plan to control my company through Isabella, to bind me to your empire. But I've been watching, Marcus. These documents prove your manipulation, your attempts to undermine my board. I'm done playing your game. He leaned forward, his voice a quiet blade. If you fight me, I'll release everything. Your backroom deals, your threats, your daughter's behavior. The world will see the Devereaux for what they are. Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. Julian's words were a revelation, a dismantling of the power that had crushed her for so long. Marcus's face contorted, a mix of rage and calculation, but he said nothing. His silence a concession. Isabella, however, lunged for the folder, her nails scraping the table. You can't do this, she screamed, her composure shattering. She's nothing, a maid. You're choosing her over me? Julian's gaze flicked to Maya, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes. Resolve, perhaps, or a flicker of the man who'd watched her dance. I'm choosing what's right, Julian said, his voice steady. He turned to Marcus. Take your daughter and leave. We'll settle the divorce through lawyers. But know this. Maya stays. She's worth more than your games. The words hit Maya like a wave, her knees weakening. No one had ever valued her. Not like this. Not in a world that saw her as less than human. Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes burning with suppressed fury. You'll regret this, Thorne, he said, his voice a low hiss. He grabbed Isabella's arm, pulling her toward the door. We're done here! Isabella struggled, her screams echoing as they descended the stairs, her suit jacket trailing like a fallen banner. The front door slammed, the sound reverberating through the mansion, leaving a silence that felt both victorious and fragile. Maya stood alone with Julian, her hands trembling, her cheek still stinging from Isabella's slap. He turned to her, his expression softening, but the weight of the moment kept them both silent. Are you all right? He asked, his voice gentle, a stark contrast to the fire he'd unleashed. Maya nodded, her throat too tight for words. She wanted to thank him, to ask why he'd risked so much, but all she could do was meet his gaze, her eyes brimming with unspoken gratitude. Julian nodded as if understanding and walked away, leaving her in the salon, the scattered papers a testament to the battle she'd just won. Maya sank onto the sofa, her fingers tracing the torn edge of her dress, still clutched in her hands. The mansion felt different now, its shadows less oppressive, but the victory was bittersweet. Marcus's threat lingered, a dark promise of retribution. Yet for the first time, Maya felt seen, not as a maid or a victim, but as a person worth fighting for. The scar on her shoulder pulsed, not with pain but with pride, a reminder that she had survived, and now perhaps she could begin to live. The New Orleans mansion stood quiet, its cypress halls no longer suffocating but tentative, as if testing the weight of a new reality. Maya moved through the kitchen, her hands steady as she chopped vegetables for a gumbo, the sharp scent of the Holy Trinity, onions, bell peppers, and celery, stinging her eyes. The gray maid's uniform felt less like a chain today, though its starched collar still chafed her neck. At 20, she carried the echoes of Isabella's slap and Julian's stand, the confrontation with Marcus Devereaux a fresh wound in the air. The Devereaux were gone, their threats hanging like smoke, but Julian's defense had ignited something in Maya, a fragile belief that she might be more than a shadow. Yet fear lingered. Power like Marcus's didn't vanish quietly, and Maya knew the cost of being seen could be steep. The morning sun filtered through the tall French doors, casting soft patterns on the counter where Maya worked. She hummed a faint jazz tune, a remnant of her dance in the pale yellow dress, now torn and tucked away. Julian's words, "Maya stays. She's worth more than your games," replayed in her mind, a lifeline she clung to but didn't fully trust. He'd risked his empire for her, a maid, a nobody in the Devereaux's eyes. Why? The question gnawed at her, stirring a mix of gratitude and unease. She glanced at the study door where Julian had retreated after the showdown, his silence a puzzle she couldn't solve. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Julian stood in the doorway, his usual linen suit replaced by a simple white shirt, his sea-gray eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "can we talk?" Her heart skipped, but she nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. He gestured to the small wooden table in the corner, a space usually reserved for staff breaks, not magnate conversations. She sat, her hands clasped tightly, bracing for whatever came next. "I owe you an apology," Julian began, sitting across from her, his hands resting on the table, fingers laced as if to anchor himself. "I knew Isabella was cruel, her words, her actions, but I let it go on too long. I should have stopped it sooner." His voice carried a weight, a confession of guilt that caught Maya off guard. She searched his face, expecting the cold magnate from the society pages, but found instead a man wrestling with his own failures. "You didn't have to do what you did," Maya said, her voice quiet but steady. "You stood up to them. For me. No one's ever done that." Her scar itched under her sleeve, a reminder of her survival, but Julian's gaze held no pity, only respect. She hesitated, then added, "Why? I'm just the maid." Julian leaned back, his eyes drifting to the window, where sunlight danced on the glass. "That day I saw you dancing," he said, "in that yellow dress. You weren't just the maid, you were alive. In a way this house never is, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. How to feel human." His words landed softly, but they stirred a storm in Maya. The memory of her dance, her moment of freedom, felt sacred, and knowing he'd seen it made her cheeks warm. He continued, his voice measured. "I've been gathering information on Isabella and Marcus for months. Her cruelty, his schemes. I needed to be sure before I acted. But yesterday, when she hit you, I couldn't wait anymore." Maya's throat tightened, the sting of the slap resurfacing, but Julian's honesty dulled its edge. He wasn't just her employer, he was a man unraveling the chains of his own making. Maya took a breath, her fingers tracing the table's grain. "I've never told anyone this," she said, her voice trembling. "My father was a baker, a good man. He fought for justice for our community, for people like me. But a fire took him, my mom, everything, when I was 5. I ended up in an orphanage, thinking I'd died too." She touched her shoulder where the scar lay hidden. "This is all I have left of them. I wanted to be like him, to fight for what's right. But life had other plans." Julian listened, his gaze unwavering, absorbing her words as if they mattered. "You're still fighting," he said quietly. "Every day you get up, you're fighting. That's not nothing." His words pierced her, a validation she hadn't known she needed. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a victim or a servant, but as Maya, the girl who'd survived. He stood, retrieving a ledger from the counter. "I have resources," he said, opening it. "Connections in the city, access to records, private investigators. If you want, I can help you find out what happened to your family, your father, your past." Maya's heart leaped, fear and hope colliding. The idea of answers, of reclaiming her story, was overwhelming. But the orphanage had taught her to distrust promises. Still, Julian's sincerity, his willingness to act, chipped away at her defenses. I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know where to start." Julian nodded, a faint smile breaking through his usual reserve. "We'll figure it out together. No pressure." The word "together" hung between them, a bridge over the chasm of their worlds. The days that followed felt like a dream, woven with cautious trust. Julian joined Maya in the kitchen more often, not as a boss, but as a presence, sipping chicory coffee while she cooked, his awkward attempts at small talk drawing soft laughs from her. One afternoon, he tried to knead dough for beignets, his technique comically poor. "You're going to make a mess," Maya teased, taking the dough. "Stick to shipping." He chuckled, a sound so rare it warmed the room, and for a moment the mansion felt less like a cage. Maya began to share more, stories of her father's late-night talks about justice, her mother's laughter, the way fireflies lit up their small courtyard. Julian listened, sharing fragments of his own life, a childhood marked by ambition, a shipping empire built to escape a fractured family. Their conversations were tentative, like steps on thin ice, but each one strengthened the bond forming between them. Maya caught herself smiling more, her shoulders less hunched, her scar less a burden. One evening, Julian set up a film projector in the salon, showing Maya newsreels of the city archives. "This is a start," he said, pointing to a flickering image. "We'll look for your father's case. Any leads?" Maya's fingers hovered near the projector, her heart racing. The idea of answers was daunting, but Julian's quiet encouragement steadied her. She read her father's name from an old newspaper clipping, the text flickering with possibilities, and felt a spark of agency she'd thought lost. As night fell, they sat on the gallery, the city's gaslights twinkling below. Maya wrapped her hands around a mug of sweet tea, the steam curling in the cool air. "Thank you," she said, meeting Julian's eyes, "for seeing me." He looked at her, his gaze soft but intense. "You were never invisible, Maya. I just had to learn to look." The words settled in her chest, a light piercing the darkness she'd carried for so long. The mansion, once a tomb, began to feel like a place where she could breathe, where her dreams, her father's dreams, might find a way to live again. The New Orleans mansion glowed under the golden light of a Saturday morning, its cypress floors no longer a prison, but a canvas for possibility. Maya stood before a full-length mirror in the guest room, her gray maid's uniform discarded, replaced by a soft blue dress that hugged her frame with quiet elegance. A delicate silver chain rested against her collarbone, catching the light as she moved. At 20, her reflection was a revelation. Eyes bright with purpose, shoulders squared. The scar on her shoulder was no longer a mark of shame, but a badge of resilience. The mansion, once a labyrinth of cruelty under Isabella's reign, hummed with a new energy, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift. Julian's stand against the Devereaux had shattered the old order, and Maya, no longer invisible, stood ready to claim her place in a world she'd thought lost to her. She traced the chain's pendant, a gift from herself, bought with her final wages as a maid. It symbolized her choice to step forward, to honor the girl who danced in a pale yellow dress, and the woman she was becoming. The past week had been a whirlwind. Julian's promise to help find her father, their shared moments in the kitchen, the tentative trust weaving them closer. Yet today held a weight beyond those quiet victories. A manila envelope lay on the dresser, delivered by a private investigator Julian had hired. Its contents could rewrite her story, reconnect her to the father she'd believed dead for 15 years. Her heart raced, a mix of hope and fear, as she prepared to face what lay within. Downstairs, Julian paced the salon, his white shirt uncharacteristically casual, his hands adjusting his cufflinks in a rare display of nerves. He wasn't the untouchable magnate today, but a man on the edge of a moment he knew would change everything. Maya's journey had awakened something in him, a desire to be more than his empire, to live with purpose. He glanced at the staircase, waiting for her descent, his mind replaying the image of her dancing, her laughter a melody that had cracked his guarded heart. Today, he would give her more than answers. He would offer her a promise, a tether to the future they might build together. Maya descended the stairs, her steps measured, the blue dress flowing like a gentle wave. Julian's breath caught as he looked up, time pausing as their eyes met. She was no longer the maid who'd cowered under Isabella's wrath, but a woman who'd reclaimed her light. "You look incredible," he said, his voice soft, a smile breaking through his usual reserve. Maya's cheeks warmed, her lips curving. "I feel like me," she said, the words a quiet triumph. She glanced at the envelope in his hand, her pulse quickening. "Is that—" Julian nodded, holding it out. "The investigator found something. Your father, Maya. He's alive." Her hands trembled as she took the envelope, her fingers brushing his, the contact grounding her. She opened it, pulling out a report that detailed a man living in a small bayou town, a retired baker who'd never stopped searching for his daughter after a fire tore them apart. Photos slipped out. A man with her father's eyes, older but unmistakable, standing outside a modest cypress cottage. Maya's vision blurred, tears spilling as she pressed a photo to her chest. "He's alive," she whispered. The words a prayer answered. Julian stepped closer, his voice gentle. "He's been looking for you, Maya, all these years." The investigator spoke to him. "He wants to see you." Maya's knees weakened, and she sank onto the sofa, the photo trembling in her hands. "I thought he was gone," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was alone." "You're not alone." Julian sat beside her, his presence steady. "Not anymore." His words wrapped around her, a warmth she hadn't known since her father's laughter filled their old courtyard. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Why are you doing this? Helping me? Risking everything?" Julian hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Maya's breath hitched, but he opened it to reveal a silver necklace with a star-shaped pendant, its simplicity a stark contrast to Isabella's gaudy jewels. "This isn't a ring," he said, a faint smile softening his intensity. "It's a promise. That you belong here, with me, in whatever way you choose. You've brought light to this house, Maya. To me." He fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers lingering, their closeness electric. Maya touched the star, her heart full. "I never thought anyone would see me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not like this. Julian's gaze held hers, unguarded. I see you, Maya. I always will. The moment stretched, fragile and profound, a bridge between their past and a future unwritten. She didn't pull away, her smile a quiet acceptance of his promise. A step towards something neither could yet name. The doorbell rang, shattering the intimacy. A courier delivered a newspaper, its headline screaming of Isabella's downfall. Devereaux heiress exposed in scandal. Julian scowled, his jaw tightening. The newsreel footage leaked, he said, tossing the paper aside. Marcus is pulling strings to save face, but Isabella's finished. Maya felt a pang of vindication, but no joy. Isabella's cruelty had cost too much. She thought of the pale yellow dress, torn but cherished, a symbol of her defiance. Isabella's empire had crumbled, but Maya's was just beginning. Julian drove her to the bayou town that afternoon, the road winding through moss-draped oaks, the air thick with possibility. Maya clutched the photo, her father's face a beacon guiding her home. Julian's presence beside her was a quiet strength, his occasional glances filled with unspoken support. What if he doesn't recognize me? She asked, her voice small. Julian reached for her hand, his touch warm. He will. You're his daughter. The words steadied her, a reminder of the fire that hadn't broken her. As they pulled into the town, Maya's heart pounded. The cottage was modest, its porch adorned with oyster shell wind chimes, a far cry from the mansion's cold grandeur. She stepped out, the star pendant glinting, and saw him. A man with her father's eyes standing at the gate, his face etched with hope and disbelief. Maya, he whispered, his voice trembling. She ran to him, tears streaming, and fell into his arms, the years melting away. Daddy, she sobbed, his embrace a home she'd thought lost forever. Julian watched from the car, his chest tight with something deeper than relief. Maya's laughter, her father's tears, were a victory he'd helped forge. She turned, waving him over, and he joined them, shaking her father's hand, a silent partner in her joy. The mansion awaited their return, no longer a cage, but a place where Maya could dream again. She stood between her father and Julian, the star necklace a promise, her blue dress a declaration. She was Maya, survivor, daughter, woman, and her new beginning had just begun. Thank you for joining us on Maya's incredible journey, from the shadows of the mansion to the light of her new beginning. We hope her story of resilience and hope touched your heart. What moved you most? Did Maya's dance or Julian's stand spark something in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you. Your support keeps these stories alive, so subscribe for more tales that inspire and uplift. Until next time, stay strong, keep shining, and we'll see you soon.